With so much to do, how do you get it all done on your small farm, homestead, or estate? I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead. Here is the secret of getting it all done on your small farm, homestead, or estate, any piece of property that you have. The secret is you're not going to get it all done. The key thing you must do is three. First off, you must make sure that your planting season, that you get plants in the ground when the ground temperature and the season is right. Because if you don't plant the seed, you'll never get the crop. Number two is you want to make sure that your maintenance is done consistently, because maintenance done now is less work than doing it in the future. So you don't want to have a lot of deferred maintenance. So you're going to make sure your fences are mended. You want to make sure your roofs don't leak, that kind of stuff. And then finally, we'll talk about at the end here. So most importantly is you want to make sure that the crops are getting in the ground. So you need some kind of growing schedule. In order to have a successful harvest, in order to have a homestead that delivers for you in the sense of food security, physical security, and other measures, you need to make sure things get planted on time. So what kind of things get planted? First off, you're going to have your regular garden items. You're going to have your fruit trees. You're going to have your grasses. Now, one thing I'm big into right now is natural grasslands, especially if you're going to have grazing animals. And your grasslands don't just magically grow out there. You can have issues of compaction. You can have nutrient levels. So, for example, the soil pH can be off. And you may need to increase the lime application in order to make nutrients more readily available in the soil. But ultimately, because you have a certain type of grass or like a shallow rooted grass, you're unable to keep the animals on the land long enough for their manures to fertilize the soil. So you may need to add some kind of haul-in manure or some kind of fertilizer, but you don't want to use a chemical fertilizer because it reduces the microbes and biome in the soil. So that's a complex activity, but even if you do all of that right at the wrong time of the year, you're going to have a failure. It's that complex of a system. Remember, we're working with nature. We're interacting with an ecosystem. And so we need to work on the natural timing of things. So you want to get your seed out there before it rains. Before you put the seed on the ground, you might need to aerate, or you might need to dethatch in order for that seed to have good contact with the soil. What I'm describing here is systems of thinking when approaching specific tasks. So if you're going to seed a field, and maybe you've got an old field that you're trying to revitalize, you may cut it or scold it in order to get closer to that soil. You may cut hay off of it, for example, and then come back in and aerate it. Depending on the size of the field, would influence the equipment, but aerate it, then drop seed, and then make sure you maybe top dress it with compost or top dress it with manures. Now, again, if that's a 50-acre field, you may not be able to do the top dressing. You may be limited to putting the seed in the ground. But if you have a machine such as a seeder, you might put it in with a seeder. So it's really that thinking of, okay, what time does this need to be done? Let's backtrack to determine when we need to start. And then what materials do we need to have so that we're ready? Same thing with a garden. In a garden, you may have the value of a greenhouse in order to start plants earlier. But if those plants are ready to go out in the ground and the ground is not ready, then you have problems as well. So I want to talk about the thinking as much as the doing, because if you have the thinking right, very often it becomes very clear when you can take specific actions, when you can put the seed in the soil. One thing that we like to do when we're putting out seed, especially any seed that can be broadcasted, like cover crops, is put them out in succession. So if we need a pound of seed out on a certain size field, we'll put a third of a pound out now, a third of a pound out next week, and a third of a pound out the following week. It reduces the amount of seed that we lose to birds. It gives us a better germination because we're straddling the germination period. So it may be the right soil temperature today, but tomorrow it could be cold. We want to basically get it in the increments. We also want to make sure the soil is prepared and not necessarily tillage. You can actually use on a small space a simple lawn aerator in order to get some soil to seed contact and really get a garden going that way. And plus, you don't need to till up the soil, which would destroy all plant matter. So maybe you have a clover crop. You can come in and cut it really low. We use a flail mower for that. You could send in animals, so you could impound animals on it that would eat it down to the ground. But then the aerator or the some kind of spade or some kind of just kind of blade that puts little slices in the ground would get you the seed to soil contact. Without the seed to soil contact, your seeds aren't going to germinate. Now, here's another factor is you want to get those seeds in before the rainy season so that they can get soaked into the soil. Now, there are ways to get past that by pelletizing your seed. So you can use an electric or gas cement mixer and pelletize your seed in clay, and then you can add enzymes and you can add other nutrients that would help that seed have a best start. Now, again, I'm not describing this so it's overly complex on purpose, because this is how the activity is. The activity does require planning. So what I recommend is having a one-page sheet for every common activities, and that one-page sheet has a checklist. Now, speaking of some of the activities, the second thing we talked about, and of course we have the third bonus item we'll talk about at the end, but the second thing we talked about is your maintenance. If your fences are in ill repair, you're going to have problems. What I recommend, and I've seen work really well for other people, is that you maintain basically a fence line. So you're going to have your fence, and on either side of the fence, you're going to have a width wide enough to drive a vehicle where you've removed all the trees, you've removed all the brush, and perhaps it's only wide enough to get your tractor down once or twice a year to do a flail mowing or do a bush hogging. But essentially, inspect that fence line on a daily basis, if possible, at no more than a weekly basis, so that you can discover any trees that have fallen, any possibility of your animals escaping. Now, if you're managing even a small amount of animals, a break in the fence could lead to all your animals wandering off, or it can lead to predators getting inside of your enclosure and causing problems. So you want to walk your enclosure on a regular basis and then make a checklist of anything that needs to be repaired, and then get out there and repair as much as possible. Now, one technique that works really well for maintaining or doing maintenance is a maintenance log. So I worked in a maintenance shop while I was in college for a little bit, and we had a log on the wall, and a ticket was opened for every maintenance activity. We'd have an index card that had a brief summary of what the problem was and what the proposed solution was, and it would go in a system, and then those cards would get tasked out to people. Later, when I was in IT services, we had the same thing with a help desk or a service desk. Use some simple system to log all your maintenance and repairs, and depending on where you're located and the size of your farm, you may need to have a logbook that is inspected, but this logbook basically lists out all the activities and tasks, and when you get 2 or 3 maybe it's at the end of the month, you get 2 or 3 fence-related items, you go out there and do all the fence stuff at one time. In the short term, you're going to do quick maintenance, but a log or tree falling near or on a fence is an opportunity to get firewood. You want to make sure it's accessible. You want to make sure that you can cut that wood down, put it in the back of your vehicle, and then take it back to process. The key is mended fences make good neighbors, and mended fences make for profitable animal activities. But it goes the same for roofing. The roof would have priority over the walls in a barn or outdoor enclosure. You have to think about what are the things that must be repaired right now to prevent further damage. So if you've got a hole in the roof of your feed barn or your feed shed or your feed closet, then you want to take care of that, because if it damages feed, you won't be able to feed that to animals. The same thing might go with pest control, because pest control is a serious thing. I put that under maintenance. The final thing I want to talk about when it comes to your small farm, homestead, or estate, when it comes to timing and it comes to planning, is your site design plan. You're going to have a master plan for your property, and that master plan is going to contain projects which are going to be accomplished over a specific timeline. Because there's very often more things we want to do with our land than we can actually do with our land for resources reasons or financial reasons or whatever, we want to make sure that we have a catalog of these activities so we can focus on what's most important. So there's a farm that I volunteer on, and their focus right now is getting up fences to paddock out a grazing area. That's more important than the market garden. That's more important than the wild area that has wildflowers. That's more important than other demonstrations. Now, it's not more important than previously scheduled activities such as processing chickens, but it is so important that every day someone's out there working on the fence line. Now, when the fence activities are done, that task will be put away, those tools will be put away, and then the next project can move forward. So if you've got 4 or 5 things you want to do, so for example, you want to have a chicken operation, you want to have a rabbit operation, you want to have goat operation, and you want to have pig operation, you put all 4 of those things down on a master index. And then for each of those items, you take a single sheet of paper and you outline some kind of project plan. Now, I'm more formal project plan type person because I delegate a lot of activities. But this plan could be as easy as a single sheet of paper that's going to answer who, what, when, where, and why that particular activity is happening. And then as you progress in that activity, it keeps track of the work to be done and the work that's completed. But ultimately, allows you to focus on one thing at a time. So the chicken, rabbit, goat, pig concept is a farm that we're developing right now under the HIT Family Farm. And it's going to have these items when it's done. But right now, once we're on the land, we're going to start with just chickens. Why chickens? Because chickens have high utility value to prepare garden spaces, to eat ticks and insects, and to reduce give us some egg proteins. That's the mindset, again, that you want to make sure that you're looking at. The project that you're doing now, will it create additional resources that can be reinvested in your overall operation? So the chickens will produce eggs, which will feed the family. Even if you just have eggs and vegetables, you've got food. What would be next? Rabbits, because rabbits can be raised over chickens, and rabbits can be raised in having their waste being taken out and put in such like a chicken composting system. Once you have the compost in place, it can then further feed the garden. So the outputs of one system become inputs to another system. Now, goats are great, because goats will help clear out the underbrush in the woods, but we don't need to have goats right away because I used a forest mulcher to clear out large areas where we can have the other types of activities. And then again, pigs will be great, but the pigs need clearer woods in order to get in and out of the woods, and they need to have a different type of fence than the chickens, rabbits, or goats. Now, of course, the chickens and the rabbits don't have fences. They do have fences, but they have smaller enclosures. So we also started from the smallest thing to the larger thing. Think about this. Write it down in a plan. You need to have a master plan for your property so that you can not only capture that vision you have, but actually bring it to results. The biggest thing that we want to make sure folks do who are subscribers to Prosperity Homestead is actually have a fully functioning homestead that provides for your food needs, your physical security, and your economic needs. So whether you're transitioning from a full-time employment to full-time farming, or you're maintaining your full-time employment perhaps remotely, and then enjoying these outdoor activities on your land, you're able to do this as quickly as possible without the overwhelm and frustration of having too many projects. Everything rolls into the master plan. If it's a maintenance or repair, you'll end up having a 3-ring binder that'll have maps of your property. It'll have the types of tools you need for fencing work. It'll have the one-pagers that identify how you approach certain jobs. It'll have chore lists that you can give to your kids so that they can start doing the activities. I'm really big on delegation. You shouldn't be doing all this work yourself. A farm cultivates from community. It doesn't just magically happen. It's not something you do after hours, after a full-time job. It's not something you do by yourself and your family enjoys. It's a whole family experience and often is an interaction with community. And the last note I want to have here is that if you can't do it on your farm, so for example, the chicken operation, I am unable to do a chicken operation on my own farm. So I take the same amount of time that I would invest in my own farm for a chicken operation, and I invest it in someone else's farm. Now, I know a lot of folks are saying, look, Justin, I want my farm. I want my own place. I want my own land. You may not understand the amount of work and labor and, of course, the scheduling that's required and the timing with nature that's required to do this on your own land. So I want you to first get that experience. As you get that experience, you're going to have better, more informed plans. And then from those plans, you're going to have better outcomes. So I volunteer at a chicken operation. I am paid literally in chicken, which is it's almost the same amount of chicken that I'd have as a result of running my own operation, but I have no startup expenses. I have someone who is knowledgeable about the chicken operation, who is mentoring me in that particular work. And finally, I can go and very often with a group of people, process the chickens and learn the activity and build out cooperative relationships rather than having everything to myself. Now, you can do that whether you live in the city or you live in the country, whether you have land or you don't. You can start operating a homestead, operating your small farm, and doing the work in other locations. Now, if you're fortunate and you have a city farm or you have a good organic community, you can start working in that community. So I want to end this with, let's practice these skills while volunteering for worthy causes, working in community gardens, and ultimately building up the skill set that's necessary to be successful on your own property. I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead. If you have any questions about what I've covered here today, visit us at www.prosperityhomestead.org, where we have newsletters, a podcast archive, and a lot of other resources to help you have a successful small farm, homestead, or estate. I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for listening.